Hello everyone. On this video we will be finding the maximum, absolute maximum, minimum, domain, and range of a graph. Okay, so for our absolute minimum on a graph, maximum, that's the highest y value on a graph. Okay, now the absolute minimum is just your lowest y value on the graph. Right? Now, sometimes the highest and lowest value, y value, could be positive or negative infinity. Could be a number value, and like I said, it could be positive or negative infinity. So we're going to look at different ways it could look to you. All right. So if you're still writing this, feel free to press pause. But actually, we're not going to do much writing after this page because the rest are just graphs that I'm going to show you and show you how to figure out the maximum, minimum, domain, and range. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our first graph. All right, so what if we wanted to find the absolute minimum of this graph? Okay, so we can see here for this graph, since we're looking for the absolute minimum, we're looking for the lowest y value. So you see as this graph goes, because you have a closed circle here, this is your lowest y value. Okay, so we're not looking at the x-axis, we're looking at the y-axis. So the lowest y value is at -1. Okay, so that means our absolute minimum is at y equals -1. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our next graph. Okay, so you can see here, they want to know the absolute minimum of this graph. Okay, so you can see here that the lowest point on this graph is actually right here. Okay, so we're not looking at the x value, we're looking at the y value. So in this case, if your x and y axis, we're looking at the y value. So in this case, your absolute minimum is at y equals 0. So your absolute minimum is equal to 0. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to our next graph. But this time, they want us to find the absolute maximum. Okay, so you can see here we're looking for the highest point since we're looking for the maximum, the highest y value. So this one's pretty high, but you can see here this closed circle, that's the key, is actually the highest point on the highest y value on the graph. And that is at y equals 12. So your absolute maximum is y equals 12. All right, let's move on to our domain and range values. Okay, so we're looking for the domain and range here. Remember, your range is just every possible y value, and your domain is every possible x value. Okay, so you can see here I pretty much showed you the range, but y is our range going up to 3, but it's going down to -infinity when you have that point there. Okay, the answer to that is you have to look at the arrows. If you have an arrow, that means this graph is going to go forever and ever and ever in that direction. So if you kind of draw or imagine that this arrow is going to go forever and ever and ever, then that means your range starts here, because this is the highest point, and your lowest point on the y-axis, or the lowest y value, keeps going down forever and ever and ever. Okay, so your range is from -infinity, and it stops at 3. So it's between -infinity and 3. Same thing with your domain. because that arrow is going down and down and down, every possible x, if you go to negative 1,000,000, that is eventually going to have a point on that graph. Okay, so because that's going to the left, it's approaching negative infinity. So you're going to go to negative infinity, and the x values stop once you get to positive 4. Okay, but notice that closed circle. Because of that closed circle, our domain is from negative infinity to positive 4, but we use a bracket because of that closed circle. Okay, and our range is from negative infinity all the way up to positive 3, and because there are no open circles or anything like that, we're also going to use a bracket. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our next example. All right, let's look at this one. And move that, there we go. So you see that our range here starts at negative 5, and it goes all the way up to positive 1, but notice that open circle. Okay, so because you have a closed circle here, that negative 5 is included. So that negative 5 is going to have a bracket. But because it goes up to positive 1 and it has an open circle, that means it gets really close to positive 1 but never equals positive 1. So that's why you have the parentheses. So your range would be from negative 5 with the bracket all the way up to 1 with the parentheses. Okay, notice no arrows, so that's why we don't have any negative or positive infinities flying around. Okay, same thing with your domain. If you notice your domain, every possible x value is your domain. You go from negative 6, but because of that open circle, it doesn't include negative 6. So you put the parentheses. And it goes all the way to x equals 1. So because of that closed circle, includes the bracket. Okay, so that means your domain goes from negative 6 with the parentheses all the way to positive 1 with the bracket. And your range goes from negative 5 with the bracket all the way up to positive 1 with the parentheses. Okay, so those brackets and parentheses are a big deal. Alright, so let's go ahead to our next graph. Alright, so if we want to find the domain and range here, once again, you see those arrows. This arrow means it's going to go in that direction forever and ever. This arrow means it's going to go in this direction forever and ever. So that means our domain, since this is going this way forever and ever and ever, and this one's going this way forever and ever, eventually every possible x value will be over that graph. And same thing here, every possible x value will be able to have a y value. Okay, so we know that our domain is going to go from negative infinity all the way this way to positive infinity. Okay, now same thing with your range. You would think it would go from 3 or negative 6 to 3, but because of those arrows up forever. And this arrow shows that it's going to go down also from negative infinity to infinity. Okay, so remember, pay attention to those open and closed circles and those arrows. Those arrows and open and closed circles all have different jobs. Okay, so as long as you know what each one does, you should be okay. You just have to kind of notice those little changes. Alright, so let's move on to our next example. Alright. So let's find the domain and range of this graph. Okay, so we can see here, you don't have arrows on the end. Okay, you have your closed circles and open circles, which means you're going to have brackets and parentheses. Okay, so for your range, it goes all the way down to -6. Let me kind of clear that out a little. So it goes all the way down to -6. That's the lowest y value. And it goes all the way up to +5. Okay, so we're at -6. There are no open circles or anything like that. Okay, so we're actually going to include that in our range. So we're going to have a bracket there. And here you have a closed circle. So you're also going to have a bracket there. Same thing with our domain. From left to right, this graph starts at -3, but with an open circle. And it goes all the way to the right over +2 with a closed circle. Okay, so that means our domain is going to have -3 with the parentheses because of the open circle, all the way to 2 with the bracket because of the closed circle. Okay, so that's our domain. From -3, parentheses, because of open circle, all the way to 2, the bracket because of the closed circle. And again, our range, because you don't have any open circles down here, is going to go from -6 all the way up to +5 with the closed circle, and both will have the bracket. All right, so let's do one more. Okay, so we can see here that your domain, I kind of put those little marks there to show you, the domain of this graph starts at this point, which is x equals -6, and it ends at this point, which is x equals +3. Okay, so you can see there that you have closed circles on both ends. So because you have a closed circle under x equals -6, it's going to be -6 with a bracket. And so since you have a closed circle for +3, you're going to have +3 with a bracket as your domain. Okay, so your domain is -6 to +3, both with brackets. Okay, now for your range, as you can see here, it goes from -6 to -4, pretty short range. Okay, but because both of them have closed circles, you have y equals -6 with a closed circle, you have y equals -4 with a closed circle. Both of those will have a bracket. Okay, so your range is from -6 to -4, both with a bracket. All right, so hopefully this made sense, and I will see you on the next video.